welcome to another episode of the ex-Vikings podcast. I'm Emily Leiker, joined by my Minnesota Star Tribune colleagues, Andrew Krammer and Ben Goessling. We are a little over a day out from the Vikings preseason opener against the Texans at US Bank Stadium on Saturday afternoon. We have some news to talk about from this week, some practice takeaways, maybe time for a couple listener questions. But then main event today, Ben and Andrew are going to be chatting with former Vikings safety Anthony Harris. And I guess, guys, should we go ahead and dive right in?
Yeah, let's do it.
Big news this week, right? On Tuesday, the notice comes from the NFL that Vikings wide receiver Jordan Addison will be suspended for those first 3 games of the season over that drunken driving citation he received back in July 2024, and then pled down to a no contest wet reckless driving charge in July of this year. That process was literally a year long for him, and there was a lot of waiting. Took a couple weeks after that, right, for this decision to come down. Jordan didn't seem too pressed about it. Ben, you asked him if he was going to appeal. He said, no, I'm just going to take this and move on. No one on the team seems to be too stressed about this. Kevin O'Connell said he's confident in the rest of the wide receiver room. JJ McCarthy said he's confident in the rest of the wide receiver room. But there are a lot of questions from fans about whether they're going to bring someone else in to boost the depth here. Maybe it's a familiar face. Ben, what's your gut instinct on if they'll go for a transaction and bring in someone in?
Yeah, there were a lot of questions on this in the questions that we got this week. And I addressed some of this in the newsletter. I basically just said, let's talk Addison, let's talk wide receiver depth in the mailbag part of the newsletter, since there were so many on this. And the internet somehow decided this week that the Vikings are going to trade for Adam Thielen and bring him back to Minnesota, I guess. So I got into that a little bit and why I don't think it makes a ton of sense. Among those reasons is that Thielen has, I think, a $6.5 million base salary this year that the Vikings would be picking up effectively to have him play a bigger role for 3 weeks and then kind of figure out how you go from there. I don't know that that's a $6.5 million problem. And I don't know that the Panthers would want to get rid of him, especially when they gave him a raise to come back for another year in Carolina to be a security blanket of sorts for Bryce Young, and a guy that Bryce Young seems like he's starting to click with a little bit. It doesn't make a ton of sense that way. I expect they will try to go it with the receivers they have. I think Lucky Jackson, Jalen Naylor, we'll have to see why he was in a no-contact jersey on Thursday. Those two, Rondale Moore, we'll see if he's healthy. Ty Felton seems like he may be a little ways away from contributing on offense. And then you have guys like Silas Bolden that may be a little further down. But I would expect it starts with Naylor and Jackson, and then maybe Rondale Moore if he is healthy enough to be consistently involved. The preseason will sort out some of that. They could look at an addition somewhere. I would not expect the Addison news, which Kevin O'Connell made clear they've been expecting for a while, is something that's going to suddenly send them into a panic and force them into making a big move that they may not feel is a justifiable solution for the problem.
Andrew, what have we seen from some of those guys in practice, particularly I think Jalen and Lucky, because like Ben said, those are the two guys that we would expect to most step up into Jordan Addison's role.
Yeah, we haven't really seen much of a rotation. It's been Lucky Jackson taking all the wide receiver 3 reps as Addison and Naylor got bumped up to 1 and 2 with Jefferson out with his hamstring injury. But as Ben said, Thursday it was Rondale Moore sitting out. Oddly, maybe it was to rest him for Saturday because the special teams coach had just got done talking about how he was going to be the featured punt returner on Saturday. So you didn't have Rondale Moore on Saturday, didn't have Jefferson on Thursday, and then Naylor is wearing the red no contact jersey. So we finally saw some of those guys mix in. Ja'Shawn Jones, Thayer Thomas. None of these guys have real NFL experience outside of Rondale Moore, and Lucky's been around for a little bit on practice squads, but I think that's why maybe fans are so eager to know what's going to happen and what's going to, maybe Thielen coming back home or whatever, because there's just so much unproven depth behind the current guys, the starters that they have. And I do think I would be shocked if they traded for Adam Thielen, not because of all the reasons Ben just mentioned, but also because this is gearing up to be a 2 tight end, not run heavy, but more balanced offense, certainly than what we've seen in the past. And do they need to allocate? I think it's a great point that Ben said. Do they need to allocate all those resources to a position that, frankly, by the time Addison comes back, you want Jefferson and Addison on there all the time, and you might not be using a third receiver very often.
Well, you think too about the people they've paid very quickly. I mean, they've paid 2 running backs, they paid 2 tight ends. Paying for a third receiver in this iteration of the offense, I'm not sure if it's as necessary as maybe it's been in the past.
Right. There's just enough other offensive talent here that as long as Jefferson's back, as O'Connell is expressing confidence in that he'll be back for the season opener from this mild hamstring strain, like as long as he's back and you have TJ, you have Josh Oliver, you have Jordan Mason and Aaron Jones, like they're going to be fine for 3 games with those other guys filling in at wide receiver. I don't think it's as much of a concern as it seems to be online, or as some people are making it out to be.
Well, Ben, didn't you think it was noteworthy that O'Connell kept, I think he referenced at least twice, of like, we were without Addison for 2.5 games last year anyway. Yeah,
he may still be mad about that hip drop that caused that. I mean, as we heard him say this week, didn't he bring up the 12 guys in the field in Buffalo thing again this week? So he has a long memory for a lot of these things, and that may have been his way of alluding back to, hey, we were forced to do this last year because of a hip drop tackle that took him out for a couple of games. But he's right. I mean, they did have to do this last year for weeks 2 and week 3 after he got hurt in that Giants game, and they were able to make it work. So it's not the first time. It's not, probably the only time they'll have to deal with injuries throughout the course of a season. That's just part of an NFL season. But yeah, I think the fact that he pointed that out a couple times is probably an indicator of what they're thinking.
Hip drop mention is a good transition for the other kind of newsy moment that we had this week, which is on Wednesday. We got to hear about some of the rule changes that are upcoming for this season, talk with some officials about those. Andrew, what were your biggest takeaways from that meeting and what we heard about, especially like the replay assist when it comes to flags on the field and all of that?
What we heard from the officials meeting this week will pique Vikings fans' interest when it comes to the fact that everybody remembers the end of the Rams game last October where Sam Darnold gets his face mask turned around, doesn't get called. It's a safety. The Vikings go down by 10 points in the closing minutes. And then the following, Grover Stewart, great defensive line name, clotheslines cinch down. That had a flag thrown. They pick it up. None of those plays were reviewable. Well, the NFL is trying to change now and is going to change this year that some of those plays, when a flag is thrown, will be reviewable. And so that Grover Stewart one where a flag was thrown, they can now actually open that up to the league office and get the right call in place, unlike what they did in that game. However, the Rams one, nothing would have changed. Trey Blake completely missed that call. None of the officials saw it. And Brad Allen, the guy who was giving us the presentation, the referee, made clear that if no flag is thrown, official replay cannot create a foul. They will not put that flag on the field for the Vikings in that moment. And that's so there's a little bit of win, a little bit of loss with this rule change. Some of this stuff will stay the same. And speaking of hip drop tackles, one of the things they want to make reviewable are fouls for hip drop tackles. But as Kevin Seifert, ESPN's Vikings writer, always points out, they don't throw flags for those because of how hard it is to judge them on the field. They fine guys after the fact. They don't actually penalize them. So there's all these questions about, well, how much are you really changing if we're only reviewing fouls that are called when so many of these are typically missed, or when hip drop tackles come into place, they just kind of punt on even officiating those in games and say, we'll review them after the fact. So some things will change, Ben, but it doesn't sound like a whole lot might change.
I mean, there's a limitation to this that boils down to the fact that you are still counting on an officiating crew to be able to be in the right position to see a rule book or correctly officiate everything in a rule book that gets more detailed and more intricate by the year, and then to make the correct call by seeing something in real time without the benefit of any technology. If you're having to make the call on the field before you can involve the technology in a lot of these things. So the NFL has wanted to keep officiating largely a human task, and the referees have a union. I'm sure there's discussions of these things when the referees are talking with the league about what the future is going to look like for them. And they don't want to have too much of their job replaced by technology. I mean, as we all talk about the onset of technology and the onset of AI and what it's going to mean for all of our jobs. I'm sure they're thinking about the same things, but it does mean there's a limit to how far the technology is going to go when that is still the state of play. You have officiating crews who are still not full-time, as is often pointed out, dealing with one of the most detailed sets of rules in professional sports and being asked to correctly officiate or correctly measure, in some cases, gauge a lot of these things when they're moving awfully fast. And, oh, by the way, don't throw too many flags because people get annoyed with flags being thrown all the time. And I'm certainly one of those people. Everybody wants the game to keep moving. But it is a difficult job. And the way that we are set up for all of this is probably going to put a limit on how far any of the technological assistance can go.
Andrew's got more on those rule changes, some of the other rule changes. There's some slight changes to the kickoff stuff that was implemented last year. That's all up on the StarTribune.com, and you can read more about that there. Anything else we saw in practice this week? I have to say, like, we got to this week in practice, and it felt like all of us were kind of like, okay, let's get to the game on Saturday. And I mean us, but also the rest of the Vikings beat in general. We all were kind of like, okay, some Sam Howell throws, some Brett Rippon throws. Oh, there's Max Brosmer. Like, we're ready to get going. But does anyone have anything else that stuck out to them in terms of things we saw or probably rather heard in practice this week?
I mean, just the night practice, it was a lot of JJ McCarthy scrambling. And that's been a theme. And we've seen a lot of times where he's pressured. He's having to deal with the fact that there's people in his face. I think the fact that he was moving around as much as he was, and then when he got asked about it, he said, hey, I was kind of trying to keep that on the down low, that I do a lot of that. But it certainly does not look like he's afraid to do it. It looks like the knee is fine if we're going to continue to wonder about those things. I mean, it's going to be very interesting to see on Saturday what it looks like with him facing somebody else, because we have not seen him operate from a lot of clean pockets. And I think Monday night, when he was running as much as he was probably as clear of an example of that as we've had in this entire training camp.
And that was the other thing he said with a big laugh on Wednesday, was that he is indeed ready to go against a different offense that is not his own, or a different defense that is not his own defense.
And at risk of getting my credential revoked for training camp, we did see on Thursday of this week, we did see a QB keeper, kind of zone read keeper run by JJ, and I think it was Aaron Jones in a red zone period. And so the stuff I was yelling from my couch or press box seat, mostly saying, do this with Sam Darnold. He's got mobility. I don't know if they're actually going to do it, but we saw them run one in practice. So I thought that was interesting.
It wasn't terribly sharp from what I remember.
No, the exchange and McCarthy ended up keeping it and running around the left end. And I've only seen the one.
Wasn't it?
What was that? Sorry.
Didn't they go the same direction?
Yeah.
I think Jones and McCarthy both went the same way. So
yeah. So maybe it wasn't even intended. Maybe he ended up keeping it because the running back screwed up. I have no idea. It just looked like it was an option, kind of QB option thing. But it's just, we don't see O'Connell do that. That's not really in his playbook too much.
No, not even with Josh Dobbs. It was not part of the playbook.
Yeah. No. So, but you're right. He's got mobility. He can get out there and run. McCarthy can, but I think he's been running more by necessity than by choice this training camp.
Agree with that.
Besides McCarthy, and probably even besides all the guys that we know are going to be starters at this point, like, who are you most intrigued to watch Saturday? Like, who are you going to be keeping an eye on?
For me, it'd be Dallas Turner. I imagine he's going to be playing a good amount. And there's a lot of guys that we're going to be interested in seeing. Ben mentioned JJ McCarthy, obviously. The other first round pick that year, though, we got to see if he can translate what has looked good in camp and practices. And he looks bigger. He looks like he's being more effective. When that all kind of goes up against a team you're not used to, how is it going to look now? And without all the bells and whistles that Flores likes to put on his defense, because I'm sure he'll show very little in the preseason here. So to me, it's Dallas, and just to see if the kind of buzz matches what he can produce on the field.
Yeah. I would say this year's first round pick. If we're going to keep with the theme of first round picks here, we didn't decide on a theme, but I'm going to make it a theme. Donovan Jackson is somebody I'm interested to see because he's had some moments in training camp where he's gotten whipped, and that has happened to a lot of offensive linemen. It's not specific to him necessarily, but he, I think, will get a chance to play and get a chance to show where he's at against a different defense. I would expect that he's going to get tested throughout the course of this season. I would imagine you're going to, if you're a defensive coordinator looking for a way to pick on this offensive line, I would assume it's, let's see if the rookies can handle stunts. Let's see if he can handle, overload blitzes, understanding who I'm supposed to pick up, and all of those decisions you have to make on the fly that are different than what you do in college football. I would imagine defensive coordinators are going to say, let's test the rookie left guard, more so than anybody else. Yes, they have a new center and a new right guard, but those two have played together before, and you have two tackles who are as good as they get. So I would think testing that connection between Donovan Jackson and Christian Darrisaw, or Donovan Jackson and Ryan Kelly, we may not see that connection this weekend. I don't think we will, because I don't expect that the left side of the line from Kelly over is going to be intact in this game. But seeing Donovan Jackson and how he comes through the preseason I'm very curious to see how that goes.
I think Donovan is probably just as excited to be going against a different defense as JJ. I was talking to him yesterday, and there was this incredible moment where I was like, well, what's it like to go up against this D line? And he was like, well, some of them have been in the league like almost as long as I've been alive. And they have all these specialty moves that they do. And I went, Jonathan Allen's hump move. And he goes, man, he's so good at that. And I was like, yeah. So I think Donovan's probably also feeling that, ready to go see someone else judge himself against someone else. I'll keep with draft picks at least and go Kobe King. I think he's probably going to get a good run on Saturday with the twos, maybe down also with the threes, and on special teams. We asked Matt Daniels about him yesterday, or I asked Matt Daniels about him yesterday, and he was really positive on him, right? Matt's seen a lot of linebackers, secondary guys go through that special teams unit. Metellus, Bo Richter last year was the big one that had some big special teams moments, and we're seeing working a little bit more, and it feels like Kobe could be kind of that next guy in that development, because we know they have plans to use him on defense eventually and have him play a big role in that inside linebacker room. But with Cashman and Ivan Pace, he's not quite there yet. Let's go ahead and do a couple listener questions while we have the time. Got to do this one first. I'll keep this as our only JJ question for today, because I think we'll have a lot more to say about JJ after we actually see him against someone else. But
is this the one the guy was complaining that he's tired of hearing about JJ?
No, because he wanted to hear about Donovan Jackson, which you already fulfilled that.
So other people want to hear about JJ, so we're good.
M on X asked for a comparison of where JJ's at right now to where Darnold was last year. We've talked about this a little bit, but I guess what's each of your reads on kind of watching those guys in practice last year compared to this year?
I mean, I think it's probably, there's some similarities there, I would say. I mean, Darnold had stretches where he really struggled, I think. I mean, he had a lot of red zone stretches where I think, has looked better than JJ has this year. I think some of the best work Darnold did last year was in the red zone, but some of that work was with Justin Jefferson too, which JJ McCarthy has not had. I also feel like the amount of time the quarterback has been under duress has been more noticeable, at least, to me this year, than what we saw last year. And I think that does affect everything, because it just makes so many opportunities where you'd like to have a clean read and like to be able to go through your progressions not there. So I think that's been the biggest thing. I think McCarthy handles that. I mean, he moves well. Darnold, we've seen that too, but the red zone accuracy, the red zone execution, especially when it's 7-on-7 and you're not dealing with as much of a pass rush, Darnold was better at that than I think what we've seen from McCarthy. I think McCarthy's done some good things. Certainly the mobility, you've seen him make some nice downfield throws. You've seen him find people in holes in coverage, in the second and third levels of coverage a few times. I think that's been impressive to watch. But yeah, the biggest difference, I would say, is the red zone stuff and what he's had to deal with in terms of pressure.
Yeah, that's a good point. I wonder how Darnold would look against Jonathan Allen and Javon Hargrave in some of these practices, in addition to Grenard, Van Ginkel. And remember, too, Darnold got to practice not only with Justin Jefferson, but with Christian Darrisaw on the blind side the entire time. JJ's had neither of those guys out there. And Darrisaw, the one thing we should mention from practices is Darrisaw seems to be ramping up a bit more, seems to be participating more in the team stuff this week. He took a day off on Thursday on the lighter day, but on Wednesday, it felt like, and rep counted, but it felt like the most we'd seen him out there. We won't see him obviously Saturday, but those joint practices next week will be huge for him. And with McCarthy, Ben, you and I have talked about how it seems like he's got a better grip on the operational, like kind of pre-snap stuff in terms of making sure everybody's aligned. And maybe this is just the offense as a whole, not messing up as much as they did last summer. But it felt like with Darnold, there were a lot of operational pre-snap penalties, illegal formations, things that we're not seeing as much of with McCarthy. We're only seeing that with McCarthy when his backup center is in there and the cadence and snap stuff isn't on point, and you get the false starts, which is more on Michael Juergens than on JJ. So with him, the pre-snap stuff seems good. Mentally seems like he's there. Physically, like Darnold had such a great arm, obviously, and we talked about it all year and everybody knows it. JJ's just not lighting it up downfield the same way Darnold is through camp. And how much of that is protection? How much of that is not having Justin Jefferson? It could be all these things. It could just be confidence too, and not knowing how long I have to stand in the pocket and deliver these things downfield. So this camp has felt more like a screen camp, more like a underneath intermediate route camp. Whereas last year with Darnold, we could kind of get glimpses of like, oh, this guy's got, maybe next to Sam Bradford, the best arm I've seen in a Vikings jersey in some time. And with JJ, there's no question about the arm talent. We just haven't seen him put it all together yet in practice where he's, lighting it up with these 30, 40-yard bombs.
Yeah, I mean, the arm, the discussion of the arm is one of these things that seems to just reverberate on the internet. And his arm is plenty good for an NFL quarterback. It is better than the reputation he had coming out of the draft. We saw it last year. We've seen it this year. So to cut to nip the aggregation in the bud, his arm is good. The difference is that he doesn't have a terribly clean platform to set up from very often. We have not seen a lot of opportunities where he can set up or roll out and really launch into a downfield shot, and probably haven't had the opportunities to do as much without Justin Jefferson. Sam Darnold's arm, if I'm going to compare the two, I would probably take Sam Darnold's arm. I mean, I think Darnold's downfield power was, like you said, Andrew, pretty unique. I mean, Sam Bradford would be the other one, but there's a reason those guys were drafted where they're drafted. But there's also a reason JJ McCarthy was drafted where he was drafted. You're not getting picked 10th if your arm isn't very good. So that is not a question, at least from what we've seen. I don't think that's something the Vikings are concerned about whatsoever. But yes, it has been less of that, I think, in part because he has had to improvise and make chicken salad out of what a lot of times.
I'll group our QB questions together here. I'll pair them. I only pulled two, but at Minnesota guy asked, how is the former Gophers QB Max Brosmer doing? One of the most fun times of practice when Max Brosmer comes out for 2 reps and then they bench him for the rest of practice. And I don't say they bench him because he does poorly on those 2 reps, but it's just they're trying to give everyone else more time, except we saw a lot of him on Thursday.
We did, yeah. To me, he doesn't look any better or worse than Brett Rippon or Sam Howell, and that's a credit to Mr. Brosmer because he just walked in from he was at New Hampshire 2 years ago at the FCS, and here he is at Vikings camp. O'Connell has praised him in terms of his mental ability, his football IQ, all those things, and that's going to go a long way with a heady coach like Kevin O'Connell. So I think he's going to be here for a minute, and practice squad potentially like we would expect, and just kind of be that guy, that developmental guy. And the question is, we'll keep asking is, what are they going to do behind McCarthy for this year? Because I have no idea.
Yeah, I think he's here. I mean, I think I would agree. I think he's practice squad. I think the question at QB2 is going to get solved probably a little more through the preseason, but we've seen Brett Rippon more in that role this week. I will be very interested to see how things shake out in the preseason. I would assume it's Howell before anybody else tomorrow, but how that goes through the preseason will be very interesting to watch.
Okay, moving off of quarterbacks. Dylan asked, have you gotten a feel for how the Vikings will deploy the D linemen? Will they continue this NASCAR package on third down or switch to having Hargraves and Allen out there? I'll say before we get into this that like the having waves of defensive linemen, that vision has come to fruition. Like it feels like no matter what the rest of the defense looks like, if it's ones, if it's twos, like they are rotating guys in every snap, every other snap, and getting fresh bodies in there. So like right now, at least they have the bodies to do that. How many of those guys they keep around, I guess, will be interesting, like where Brian Flores wants to kind of sort the roster in terms of depth and making sure he has depth. But yeah, what do you guys have specifically on like that third down part of the question?
Well, you mentioned the waves of defenders. I mean, Andrew and I have talked about this, I don't know how many times over the years. That has been the hope for a very long time that very rarely has come to fruition. I think they are in a better spot to do that than they've been in a long time. And we saw Levi Drake Rodriguez yesterday, and well, a couple times this week. He's had a very disruptive set of snaps here where he's in the backfield a lot. I think he's involved. Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins, I'm going to be curious to watch through the preseason how they involve him. Hargrave and Allen are pass rushers, so I think they're going to be involved in some of those things, but you can keep one of them fresh. You could probably give Harrison Phillips a break in some of those spots. And the other piece of it, if we're talking about a NASCAR package, I mean, Dallas Turner is a thing in a way that Dallas Turner was not last year. So I would not be surprised at all if there are rush packages with Grenard, Van Ginkel, Turner, Rodriguez maybe involved in that too. Ingram-Dawkins. I mean, Jalen Redmond, probably a little more of a nose tackle type, but he has also flashed in some of these practices too. So there are enough people that they can have some different looks. I think a little more of a speed package like we're talking about with this question. They have some of the bodies to do it. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see a little more of that.
Yeah, and now instead of Harrison Phillips or what, I can't remember who would have been the lone defensive tackle on the field in those plays. Sometimes it was 4 DNs, certainly. But instead of Phillips, now you got Jonathan Allen. Now you got more proven pass rushers to put in there. I do think, too, that we've heard coaches talk about how those NASCAR, the all DN packages are not just out of necessity of like, well, we got a lot of edge rushers. It's they truly like the matchups of taller, lankier guys against the less mobile guards in the NFL, less mobile interior offensive linemen. So if Dallas Turner is progressing like we all think he is, like they've all talked about, he'd be a perfect fit to be on that inside. And we've seen certain packages in practice where they'll have Turner inside of Van Ginkel, and they'll have those guys all on the field at the same time with Grenard on the opposite side. So it'll be fascinating to see how they deploy that, and then also how they work their disguises out of it, considering that Van Ginkel can do everything. They're trying to train Dallas to do everything as well. And if he can actually take that step, you can start to actually drop him more often than you were open to last year, and start to mix things up with him and obviously Pace and Cashman and just the chaos machine that they create. So, I think it'll be really interesting to see how much they get to those depths of defensive linemen, because Flores is also the same guy who says, we like to rest Harrison Smith, but I also prefer him on the field.
But I mean, just the principle of it, if you have passing downs where you could send a 5-man rush of Grenard, Van Ginkel, Turner, say Allen or Hargrave, say one of them stays on the field, and then your fifth is whether it's Harrison Smith, whether it's Josh Metellus, whether it's Blake Cashman, we've seen Byron Murphy blitz a few times. You're getting one-on-one matchups that you probably like. You're probably getting a lot of situations where you show 7 and you drop out, or you do the drop 8 stuff. They do quite a bit on third downs. I mean, they have even more pieces to play with in terms of their rush packages than they've had really either of the first 2 years with Brian Flores. And what comes out of that could be a lot of fun to watch.
Okay, let's finish up quick. We'll just do like a yes or no to this last one that I pulled. You can give like a sentence explainer. But Timothy asked, counting on a number of guys with serious injury history this season, some were already nicked up in camp. How concerned should we be about this issue?
I mean, it's been part of how they've gone about things, right? I mean, they have brought in guys that have a history of things to come up, and they count on Tyler Williams and that medical staff to keep everybody healthy. I mean, it is a risk. I think we've seen it blow up in their faces. Marcus Davenport is the one that comes to mind with that, but overall, their track record on it has been pretty good. I mean, Byron Murphy was a guy that came in with some injury questions, and that has not been a huge issue for him to this point in Minnesota. I mean, that's an example of it. You have guys like Allen, you have guys like Hargrave that have some of that, and obviously Fries is coming off of one Kelly, all those guys too. But I think they have trusted that medical staff for so far has done a pretty good job of keeping guys on the field.
Make sure you check out thestartribune.com for our coverage in the next 24 hours leading up to the Vikings preseason game against the Texans at 3 p.m. Saturday at US Bank Stadium. And then obviously in the 24 hours after the game, we'll have all our post-game coverage there. We'll have another episode of Access Vikings then too. For now, keep watching or listening for Andrew and Ben's interview with Anthony Harris.
Hey man, how you been?
Man, I've been doing well, man. Spending a lot of time with the family and stuff like that, and just trying to make up from a lot of years of working really hard and sacrificing a lot. So now I'm taking advantage of the opportunity to kind of cater to a lot of my relationships and really show up for people in my life.
Awesome, man. Yeah, just tell people if you can kind of just give people a summary of what you're up to these days. Obviously, playing career is done. Where you living? What does life look like for you at this point?
Yeah, playing years are done. A year after, being in NFL as a player, I kind of took that year and just continued to work out. And I said, after this year, I'm done. And so the following year, which was last year, I did a little bit of in the coaching space. I helped out with the Eagles during training camp to kind of see if that was something that I wanted to get into. And then after that, I kind of moved on to doing things in the real estate space. In the financial space, and that's been great for me. Had a lot of fun doing that, and as I continue to learn. And then outside of that, just spending time with family. I've been traveling a lot. I've been here based in Minneapolis for the past 2 years, but I've been traveling from here to Virginia to spend time with my family. And then just keeping up with guys in the league, in the NFL, as well as the college level, just trying to be a mentor and a resource for those guys to continue to thrive and accomplish some of the things that they want to do on and off the field as well.
Cool.
How long did it take you to decide that coaching was not for you?
Well, being a guy who was, very aware of, the organizational aspect, and had a great relationship with a lot of coaches, being there day to day and kind of seeing, when I leave in comparison to when they leave, and them being there, extremely early, prior to me, and other guys getting into the facility, they're there early. So I knew right away, just by all the information that they were able to provide us with, day to day in practices leading up to the games, I knew there was a ton of preparation in that aspect. And so during those times, during training camp days, seeing them spend a little bit of time with their families on the field, post practice and stuff like that, I had a pretty good idea of, the commitment and the sacrifices that those guys, make, and, women as well, as we have a few people on staff in different areas. The commitment for them was just something that I saw. And after, committing a lot of time, committing my body over the years to play in the NFL for as long as I did, I said at some point, I'll have to, pivot to family, because that's a great space for me, something that I really cherish. But I did it for 4 weeks. I wanted to go in and confirm that was kind of what I thought it was. Had a great experience with it, the connection with the players and helping those guys develop, and then seeing the progress day to day. And then also, their attitude and spirits after just continuing to put the work in and accomplish some of the things they wanted to accomplish. It really gave me a boost. So I haven't ruled out working in the space with working with players. As a coach, not quite sure if that's the
Okay.
space yet, but that's something I'm still looking at. So I try to keep up with the players and other people around the league.
Yeah, it's so interesting. It seems like that has shifted. I mean, so many more guys. I've actually been working on a project on this, but so many more guys have private coaches now. And you see this happening with high schoolers where it's guys getting private coaches at a very early age. So it seems like if you want to have a career in coaching, a career working with players, that can take on a lot of different lanes and avenues that maybe it didn't in the past. Because I mean, you're right to your point on the coaches, it's the hours. And I remember hearing Andre Patterson talk about this a lot, where it was every year you're moving your family, every year you're wearing a different hat, you're working for a different set of people, and that you're right, that toll that it takes on your family is certainly a thing you have to consider as well. So it does seem like there's more breadth of avenues you could take to get into coaching than it used to be.
Yeah, and I think it's also shifting a bit as the landscape continues to shift from getting coaches in there who are a little bit younger and they kind of understand that aspect just as well. And they want to continue to harvest those relationships. I have to imagine it's a little bit easier, in later years, when your children are starting to be a little bit older, they're not in the house as much. And then, your spouse, they're there and they support you as well. It has to be a little bit easier. But for the coaches who have like younger children and trying to be present in those moments, I have to imagine it can be tough. But I've seen over the years, head coaches and different people, also taking time to prioritize the coaches' lives and their family and doing different family nights to continue to, foster and show appreciation for that aspect of their life. And so I think that's helped over the years. And I think things like that will just continue to progress.
Well, and Anthony, you were out at Vikings training camp recently. What do you think of this current team and what they're doing right now?
Yeah, I'm excited. Where the team is right now. I followed the Vikings, since my time departing. Followed them pretty closely last year. Was able to attend a few games, and then actually did a little bit of podcast stuff on Believe Network, Vikings Believe Network, and where we covered pregame kind of analysis, post game, and then we looked at path through the playoffs and then what to do in terms of taking those next steps to become that championship caliber team. And so I discussed a little bit in the offseason on things that I thought that they could do to improve the team. And I'm pleased to say from what I've seen, they've kind of addressed all of those things. I think me as a defensive guy and being over the years, I love Flores' scheme and what he's doing defensively. I think he's very exotic in what he's doing, and he's able to create a lot of opportunity through the defense. But the acquisitions that they made this offseason, beefing up the interior of the defensive line, adding guys next to Phillips who are able to stop the run, but then adding guys who can also transition and be able to, create pressure on the quarterback from the interior. So I thought that was major as well as what they did in the secondary. And then offensively, to take that next step and acquire some guys on the offensive line, particularly in the interior after already having, two young tackles who've, shown some great spots. I think it only kind of adds, to what they can do offensively in terms of being able to run the ball more effectively. As well as having a younger quarterback, being able to keep the pocket clean and allow him to step up and make some throws. I think that combination with Coach Kevin O'Connell, I think it'll pair up well.
Anthony, I'm curious. You mentioned the defense. How different, from a safety's perspective, would this scheme be to play in than what Mike Zimmer did? I mean, Mike Zimmer would move safeties around, and you'd see whether it's you or Harrison Smith do that quite a bit. But this is obviously on a different level than the way that you guys attacked back in those days. That seemed much more about, do your job and put everybody else in a good position, where they embrace the chaos. It seems a little more, certainly a lot more than a lot of places do. Just as you watch it, if you can kind of describe for folks out there that haven't played in the league, what would this be like to play in a safety's role in this scheme compared to the way most teams do it?
I mean, honestly, I have to imagine it's a lot of fun. That defense requires a lot of versatility in terms of being able to come in the box, be physical, being able to kind of be in situations where you disguise, and it's not necessarily to your advantage to cover your assignment, but it requires a certain level of athletic ability.
Mm-hmm.
Also paired with, the mental knowledge of where to be, when to be there, and the adjustments that go throughout the defense. And so, from a guy who was extremely competitive, who really embraced the game, not only on the physical side and athleticism part, but the chess move aspect
Yeah.
of being where you're supposed to be and stuff, I have to imagine it's a lot of fun. And so it's from what I've seen, it's similar to what we did when Zimmer was here, but it seems to be also like an evolution of that as well. What we did in terms of disguising on the back end and the different coverages and linebackers being on the line of scrimmage and popping out and dropping. Some of those things are similar. But when I take a look and I see, one, natural defensive lineman kind of in the interior, and you have a number of linebackers, kind of listed in the defensive tackle
Yeah.
position. Um, it's pretty exotic, and so for them to have the success that they've had in terms of being able to be disruptive with some of those looks, they've had a lot of success. So I can only imagine if you're able to be a little bit more simplistic on some of those earlier downs with the guys who are able to kind of cause disruption without getting too exotic and kind of putting yourself in bad position. I have to think that that only provides and puts you in better positions on like third down and second down, being in longer down and distance versus being in shorter down and distances.
Yeah.
You mean because you're not having to like show or reveal anything in those moments, right? Before those moments.
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
as you start to get to, third and shorter downs, you still have the possibility to, run the ball and convert and get a first down. And particularly now, where you are on the field has been big, as we've seen number of teams take, fourth down as another possession
Right.
to, try to convert. And so
Yeah.
if you can stop the run on those first and second down opportunities and create longer downs and distances, it only cuts down on what the offensive play calls will be in terms of being able to convert a first down on third and long or third and medium.
Well, Anthony, let me ask you, what do you think of Harrison Smith still playing? Like, how close in contact do you keep with him?
I try to keep up with him every now and then, shoot him a text and different stuff like that. I'm honestly not surprised from my time, playing with him. He's a very smart guy. He takes care of his body. He's locked in on it. He's just like, he has his routine. He makes adjustments where he feel he needs to. I've been over his house a few times and talked to him over the recent years, and he's adding stuff to his regimen in terms of what he's doing with different stretching and mobility and stuff like that. And so he's able to, take care of his body and still have that athletic ability and still go out and perform at a high level. And before departing Minnesota, I told him that, I saw him being a guy who nearly played his entire career here and retire as a Viking. So I don't know if that's going to happen. That'll still be up in the future, but he has that type of capability physically, mentally, and then I just think what he embodies as well is just a great thing for the organization.
I laugh when you mention the stretching and mobility stuff. Have you seen his like medieval torture device thing at his house when you've been over there?
Yeah, I have, and I'm not actually sure what to actually call it. So that's why I just, I'm not even sure. I didn't even want to attempt. And so, but yeah, like stuff like that, not a lot of guys are doing that. And so it's things like that that separates guys like Harrison from a number of other guys in the league.
If you think back to your time here, I mean, Andrew and I were talking about it this week when Teddy Bridgewater, I think, signing with his 8th different NFL team, going back to the league, going to play for the Bucs. It'll be 9 years at the end of this month that knee injury happened. That you were on the field, we were covering practice. We all remember that day pretty well. If you were to have heard then that Teddy would still be playing 9 years later and would have fashioned a career with all these different teams, would you believe that was possible? If you can put yourself back in that day, how unlikely would that have seemed like it would have been back then?
Yeah, I think, being there that day, I just remember being on the sideline and, seeing him drop back, take a step and, go down. And so everyone holds their breaths. It's like complete silence. But it was a bad injury. And so to think that, this many years later, he would have continued to bounce back and, do what he's done. Part of it is, somewhat surprising because of how bad the injury was at the time. But in terms of him being able to physically recover, I'm not surprised, by what he's been able to do and how many opportunities he's been given with the number organization. Because spending time with them in the locker room then, as well as over the recent years, actually training with them in Florida,
Yeah.
I got to continue to know him more, got to see him work, as well as saw what he was doing in the community and his focus and his drive really allowed him to persevere and extend his career. And it just allows, organizations to continue to welcome him into their locker room because they know the type of player he is in terms of how he prepares, him working, studying the game, and then what he brings to the different communities in terms of his leadership, being involved with the different things in the community and what he does for the younger guys in terms of giving them direction and supporting them as well.
You said you were down in Florida training with them. Was that within like toward the end of your career, or was that recently?
Yeah, towards the end of my career, the
Okay.
last 2 years, I started training in Florida.
Hmm.
Where I got to really connect with a lot of guys. Previously, I had trained in Virginia, which was pretty good training. And in the last 2 years, I was like, I wanted to kind of, dial in with a couple of other people that I trained with, and kind of try to take things to the next level. And so, yeah, I trained with him and a number of other players who are, still playing, a lot of veterans as well as some of the younger guys. So I've gotten to build relationship with guys who are probably in the league now, going on year 2 and 3, and as well as some guys who are rookies or just going into their second year. So it really gave me a lot of insight.
Well, and speaking of those days with Teddy and the Vikings, I told you before the podcast, come up with a good Mike Zimmer story that you could share with the audience. Do you have any that you would want to share over your time being coached by him?
I mean, I don't have a ton of stories that would pop to my mind, but just knowing Zim and as a coach and having that relationship with him, and then the perception of how his personality is, it's funny. I remember particularly we were playing a game and defensively we started a bit slow, and so he kind of chewed into us a little bit and was like, it doesn't really matter what I call right now if you guys aren't executing. And guys kind of buckled down and we were just like, hey coach, like we got you, like don't worry. And then he's like, well, if we can't get him into third and long, we can't rush the quarterback and stuff like that. And so we go out and somebody makes a big play and he wants to smile and like smirk, but he tries to hold it in and he tries to like hold his call sheet up and act like he's not excited about what just happened. But everybody knew he was, and I forget who it was, but a veteran player, kind of walked up behind him and like smacked him on the butt and was like, "Come on, lighten up, old man!" Like, and he kind of just like jumped and like didn't really want to acknowledge it, but it was kind of one of those things. It's just like he knew when he needed to, get on certain guys. And he had a high standard for us and he held guys there. And I think, during his tenure defensively and even offensively as a team, that's why we were able to kind of do some of the things we were able to do. Just him holding us to that standard and knowing how to handle things.
And if you think back to that 2019 playoff game or after the 2019 season against the Saints, when during the week he says, I'm going to put Everson Griffin and Danielle Hunter inside. When do you remember that first coming up, and when did that idea kind of become the thing that, because I mean, that wrinkle, I remember that game was a big part of the reason it went the way it did, and that you guys win the game in the upset fashion that you did. And those two guys got all of the pressure that kind of threw the Saints off that day. Where did that wrinkle first surface, if you can think back to that week preparing for that game?
Well, I think between Zim and Coach Patterson, they've always tried to do a good job of being very cohesive in what we can do defensively, not just from a defensive line standpoint, but trying to understand how much the different looks and the different movements, how much stress that puts on the linebackers in the secondary.
Mhm.
And there was always a conversation of, if I do this in the secondary, what can we do on the defensive line standpoint to, kind of compensate for where we might be weak in that position? And so they were always talking about different things that they can do and how they could take advantage of the offensive linemen and where the weaknesses were. In that particular game, the Saints, they had some guys on the edge who were pretty athletic. And so we thought if we could get some pressure kind of up the middle, it would cause more chaos than what you would get on the edge. Not only being able to, potentially beat a center or guard and get a sack, but honestly, just squeeze in the pocket. And we talk about the spot as a team and the quarterback trying to push him beyond 7 yards.
Mhm.
So the defensive ends, they can have a chance to just run the hoop and get sacks because the quarterback's drifting too far.
Sure.
And so that was something that they came up with, and they wanted to allow those guys to use their athleticism and put them in the best position as far as matchup and as far as scheme to be successful. And so that's where I say, the evolution, Flores is kind of the evolution of what some of the things we did during Zim era is just taking some of those guys who might be known for edge rushers and giving them an opportunity to play on some interior linemen who might be a little bit slower or with their feet or with their hands, and give them an opportunity to win.
I'm so glad Ben brought up that game because it made me think too. I think that was one where you guys were down multiple corners and he put Sendejo basically in the slot, didn't he?
Yeah, he put Sendejo in the slot. And, I think that kind of shows, the ability of the defensive scheme that Zim ran as well as Flores. It kind of gives credit to the scheme and having guys like that who it takes some time to learn. But once you do, you can really disguise and pick guys in different positions where they might not necessarily have the best advantage or matchup due to athletic ability, because there's a lot of great guys offensively in this league as well. And so you having a guy or a scheme like that where you can kind of add value and bring value to the team as a whole, I think it helps.
Well, and I remember that game too. Like, at least from my perspective, I thought you guys had no shot because it was the big Drew Brees, Michael Thomas year. He set all those records. You guys were down players, and like that's why for Vikings fans, media, like we all remember that game so much. And I guess this question dovetails with it. Anthony, what moment in football brought you the most joy throughout your career?
Wow. Wow. I mean, honestly, it's tough to pick out one particular moment because I've had a lot of great memories. But I think the ones that I remember the most are like the team win moments. The Minneapolis Miracle. I can't really say that gave me the most joy because it was so shocking. It almost was like so unbelievable that I couldn't actually enjoy it. That's how big of a moment that was. But I think in those moments of just like a guy makes a play, how hard he's worked. Maybe he was battling through injury, or maybe he had like a tough game before. And I just remember guys celebrating one another was probably some of the best moments that I had. I think one, I believe I had an interception or something like that. And everybody ran down and we took a picture like kind of in the end zone in the middle of the field. Like I remember moments like that. I remember moments when like Eric Kendrick gets an interception and he returns it for a ton, and then he runs down and he's doing a handstand in the end zone. And it's not particularly about who made the play and the notoriety that they got, but it was more so about the enjoyment and excitement that each person was able to have in that moment because what somebody else did. Those are the moments that really stick with me.
You think back to, that run with the Eagles. I know you were on the practice squad for the actual Super Bowl. What memories do you have of just that experience of getting to that point and kind of going on that run with that team?
Yeah, I think everything kind of builds. Everything kind of builds in all of those moments that I spoke about, even with the Vikings, of just having my first tenure there with them, us building, making a run to the playoffs, and ultimately losing to Tampa Bay. And so, kind of being there through those moments, through those journeys, a lot of lessons learned. To then, depart and go to Denver for 14 weeks and come back,
Yeah.
and be a part of guys who were there the year prior when I was on the team and active, as well as being there with guys who they had just acquired. And so to be able to know those guys' story, see the work that they put in, understand like the injuries and the sacrifices and all of the work that, guys put in, it was the team aspect of buying in, and connecting with one another, and everybody being one with each other in terms of the coaches and the players on what they wanted to get done. So that part was something that I took away from in terms of the cohesiveness, of the players and of the coaches, and how there was a give and take in what they wanted to do, and everybody just had a standard and tried to uphold it.
Well, Anthony, before we let you go, I've always wondered what you thought when the team franchise tagged you after that 6 interception season. Because I think most players, I'm not speaking for you, but I would assume most players want to hit free agency and see what the market happens. Like, what did you think when they did that?
Yeah, honestly, I think I was a little bit shocked, but not quite. I mean, I thought, I had a good season. At the time, a lot of guys were getting franchise tagged. I think the biggest thing during that time, that probably made that off season, not only for me, but maybe even the NFL and executives, was COVID.
Yeah.
Because that surrounding that time was a lot of talks or speculations on if there would even be an NFL season for a time. So I think for me, I almost focused more on that aspect of it, of like, not am I going to get a contract, but are we actually even playing football this year? And understanding kind of what was going on, people losing their lives at the time. So there was a lot that was going on that kind of had me focus on that. I was spending a lot of time with family, who at the time were probably considered high risk for COVID. So there were a lot of important things that kind of kept me a bit distracted at the time, from that whole situation. But it was one of those things where I was pleased that I played well enough where, they said that, we want to franchise tag this guy. And yet at the same time, I think with my journey of being a free agent guy, proving myself and really just embracing the Minnesota culture, like, within the community, within the team, I never really wanted to leave Minnesota. And so I think from that standpoint, I was hoping to get a deal done. It didn't actually get done, but I think at the end of the day, like, it all worked out in terms of, me getting the franchise tag, being able to come back, still have a great relationship with players and coaches and front office there, and actually talk about it. And so I think for me, there was a lot of growth personally, as well as just, understanding the landscape and the business. And sometimes, things don't work out. It's just a matter of timing.
Absolutely. Well, Ben, is there anything else you wanted to ask, Anthony?
Yeah, just in terms of, as you think through it now, the journey from undrafted free agent to, I mean, we talk about franchise tag and just playing as long as you did. How gratifying is it to think back on the overall journey, knowing where you started and where you ended up through the course of your NFL career?
Well, I mean, I think I'm very appreciative, for the opportunities that I was given, because, I've seen a lot of great players, who don't get the opportunity.
Yeah.
So I think for one, I always try to be rooted in being grateful for having the opportunity. In terms of what I was able to accomplish, there was never really a doubt of who I was as a player. I believe, me going undrafted didn't represent, my capabilities. And I think that stemmed from, having success in college to then, being injured, not being able to compete,
Yeah.
or showcase my athletic ability, coming out. I think that was something that hurt me, in terms of, from the scouting side.
Sure.
But I knew, like, mentally, and just the willpower, that I was willing to do whatever it took, to become, a good player, whether that was studying the game, whether that was the workouts or whatever it was. I knew I was willing to do that. And so I never had a doubt that I could be a good player in the NFL. And so each year I just focused on, proving that, and really just being an asset to the team.
Mhm.
And I think me focusing on being an asset and embracing my role allowed me the endurance to show up each season, and compete for a roster spot, as well as compete to, be a starter. And I think as long as I kept that as the forefront, that's how I was able to really, play as long as I was.
Yeah.
Absolutely, Anthony. Well, it was a joy, obviously, watching you on the field for 8 years, 6 of them in Minnesota, and certainly a joy having you on this podcast. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Yeah, you were always a class act to cover, and it's fun to see what you're doing now. So we, very much appreciate you taking the time, and it's good to see you. Good to catch up.
Yeah, same here.
All right, thanks, Anthony.